Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Christmas morning at the Wallace home was unusually quiet. Neighbors were used to the usual household sounds, the laughter of loved ones, the hum of daily chores, muffled conversations. But that day, an eerie silence hung behind the closed door. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, William Wallace met them at the door. He spoke calmly, insisting that a tragic accident had occurred. But from the very first moments, the scene inside the apartment didn't match his words. The sequence of events didn't add up, and the atmosphere felt tense. At first, it seemed like a heartbreaking domestic tragedy, but as the investigation progressed, it became clear. Something far more disturbing had happened behind those closed doors. Zazell Dominique Preston was born on September 5, 1985, in Anaheim, California. She grew up in a large family, raised by her mother, who single-handedly cared for 5 children. Zazell never knew her father. He was never part of her life. The home she grew up in was always filled with energy, the constant noise and chaos that came with having 4 brothers. But despite the challenges, her mother always did everything she could to provide for them. From an early age, Zazell showed a passion for creativity. She loved to draw, spending hours sketching and bringing her ideas to life on paper. Her interest in the arts wasn't limited to painting. She loved to dance, easily picking up choreography and dreaming of one day performing on stage. Music also played a huge role in her life. She taught herself to play the piano by ear and seriously considered pursuing a career in the field. She eagerly took part in school plays and creative competitions, hoping that one day her passion would become her profession. Teenage years brought new emotions into her life. At 16, Zazell fell in love for the first time. Romantic walks, late-night conversations, a first love that felt like it would last forever. She believed her future would be bright, filled with love and happiness. But reality had other plans. At 17, she found out she was expecting. The news changed everything. The father of the child refused to take responsibility and disappeared, leaving her to face this new reality alone. The realization that she would have to take on this journey by herself could have broken anyone, but Zazell refused to let herself fall into despair. She faced her situation with determination, fully committed to being the best mother she could be. After finishing high school, she started working, taking on any job she could find. During the day, she worked at a cafe. In the evenings, she picked up shifts at a clothing store. And at night, she tried to learn new skills, hoping for a better future. Eventually, she taught herself makeup artistry and began working as a freelance makeup artist, taking on clients whenever she could. After years of hard work, Zazell finally managed to provide a stable life for herself and her daughter. It wasn't luxurious, but it was steady. She found a way to balance work, raising her little girl, and even making time for friends. She refused to dwell on hardships, always trying to stay positive. But life had yet another challenge in store for her. At 22, Zazell found out she was expecting again. The story repeated itself. The father of the child chose not to take responsibility and disappeared, just like before. Now, she faced an even tougher reality, raising 2 little ones on her own. But she didn't back down. She worked even harder, pushing herself through exhausting shifts to make sure her family had everything they needed. Despite the constant struggle to build a better life, Zazell never felt truly alone. Her friends stood by her side, offering support when she needed it most. She remained upbeat, full of energy, and never lost faith in the future. But soon, everything was about to change. She was about to meet the man who would become her worst nightmare. In 2008, a new man entered Zazell's life, William Wallace. He was 26 years old and at first glance seemed confident and self-sufficient. He spoke about his difficult childhood, how he grew up without parents and had to learn to rely on himself from an early age. There was something in his words that made people sympathize with him. He had a way of being persuasive, presenting himself as strong and determined, someone who had faced hardships but never let them break him. His past seemed dark, but the way he spoke about it made it sound like he had overcome it and become a better person. Zazell was drawn to his persistence. He showered her with attention, made thoughtful gestures, and always found ways to show her how much she meant to him. Their relationship moved quickly. She liked how confident he was, how he seemed to know exactly what he wanted. At the time, nothing about him raised concerns. On the contrary, he was charming, attentive, and knew how to make a woman feel special. She believed she had finally found someone ready to take on responsibility, someone she could rely on. As time passed, their relationship took the next step. They moved in together. After spending more and more nights at her place, William eventually moved in for good. Along with him, Zazell's 2 young daughters from her previous relationships shared the apartment. However, as their relationship progressed, unsettling signs began to emerge. At first, it was small things. He would get irritated if she spent time with others, or he would show displeasure if someone else had too much of her attention. He would jokingly criticize her appearance, casually mentioning that he didn't like certain outfits. At first, it seemed like he was just being protective, but over time, it became clear that beneath it all was a desire to control her. William demanded that she always tell him where she was and who she was with. He called her multiple times a day, even when he knew she was at work. If Zazell was late, he would immediately become suspicious, accusing her of being disrespectful toward him. When she tried to explain that she needed personal space, he acted offended, saying she was ungrateful and that other women would appreciate the kind of attention he gave her. He refused to let her have any independence, and when she pushed back, he either turned it into a joke or made her feel like she was overreacting. Before long, his jealousy escalated into aggression. One day, William lashed out at her for simply speaking to a male coworker. He accused her of flirting, of not valuing their relationship. He raised his voice, insisting that he knew how women behaved and that she needed to respect his feelings. The real nightmare unfolded in the summer of 2008. One evening, William came home in a rage. The reason? Zazell had stayed out a little later than usual after meeting up with her friends. He didn't let her explain, didn't listen to a word she said, and the tense conversation quickly turned into something much worse. Without warning, he grabbed her by the neck and started choking her. His grip was so strong that her vision blurred. She struggled to break free, but he didn't loosen his hold until she was nearly out of strength. Then, consumed by anger, he threw her against the wall with such force that her head hit the hard surface. A sharp pain shot through her body. Zazell collapsed onto the floor, her ears ringing, her breathing shallow. For a moment, it was as if he snapped out of it and realized what he had done. He stepped back, but he didn't apologize. Instead, William coldly told her that she had brought this on herself. Zazell knew she couldn't stay with him any longer. Gathering what little strength she had left, she ran out of the apartment and knocked on a neighbor's door. When they opened it, they found her in tears, her neck red with marks, her face showing clear signs of what had just happened. With shaking hands, she dialed for emergency services. By the time officers arrived, Zazell was still in a state of shock. Inside the apartment, William had already calmed down and was trying to downplay the situation. He acted like nothing serious had happened, attempting to convince the officers that it was just a minor argument, that he never meant to hurt her. But the marks on Zazell told a different story. William was arrested on the spot. It was the first time he had faced consequences for his behavior, but the legal process was nothing short of a disappointment for Zazell. Despite the clear evidence of the attack, he was sentenced to only 19 days in jail. It felt like a cruel joke, as if her pain meant nothing. The young woman hoped this would be the end of it, that William would finally be out of her life, but it was only the beginning. After serving his sentence, William returned as if nothing had happened. He knew Zazell was shaken by the ordeal, and that regaining her trust would be difficult, but he was persistent. In the first few days after his release, he didn't pressure her. He chose a different approach. He told her he had changed, that he regretted his actions, that he was ready to start over. He promised that things would be different, that it would never happen again. But words alone weren't enough. To convince her, William turned to a more subtle form of manipulation, religion. He started talking about faith, saying that during his time in jail, he had realized the weight of his past mistakes and turned to God. He quoted the Bible, spoke about forgiveness, and insisted that anyone could change if given a second chance. He reminded her that Christ taught people to forgive and asked, Aren't you a Christian? Don't you believe in redemption?" His words struck exactly where they needed to. Zazell was a deeply religious person who regularly attended church. She had always been taught the importance of patience and forgiveness, that a woman should stand by her partner. William used her own faith against her, convincing her that what had happened was just a mistake, a moment of weakness, but that he was a different man now. He swore that she was the only one who could help him become better, and that without her, he would be lost. Under this pressure, Zazell began to question her own choices. Her friends and family warned her not to make the same mistake again, but she struggled with doubt. William truly seemed remorseful. At first, she only listened to his words, but then she went even further. She officially dropped the protective order that had been keeping him away from her. The moment that happened, things started to spiral again. His jealousy returned almost immediately. William began setting strict rules for her, criticizing her over the smallest things. Now that he felt back in control, the pressure intensified by the day. He would lash out if she came home late from work. He insisted that she distance herself from her friends, claiming they were trying to turn her against him. At the same time, William was living a double life. He was unfaithful, but whenever Zazell started to suspect something, he twisted the situation in his favor. If her friends showed her proof of his affairs, he convinced her that they were just jealous. He told her that she should only trust him, that everyone around her wanted to destroy their relationship. He was a master manipulator, making her question things that were right in front of her. During this period, William frequently found himself in trouble. In 2009, he was arrested for possession of prohibited substances. But when he got out, he once again found a way to explain it all away. He claimed he had been wrongly accused, that the police had made a mistake, that he was just a victim of the system. He told Zazell that the world was against him, and that she was the only person who truly had his back. Between 2009 and 2011, he was arrested multiple times. Each time, he got out and came right back to Zazell, using the same words, the same promises. He was becoming more unpredictable. She tried to convince herself that he would change, but with every incident, that hope became harder to believe. She didn't realize just how deeply trapped she was in the world William had built around her. In 2011, Zazell became pregnant with William's child. The news left her with mixed emotions. On one hand, she loved her children and believed she could give them a good life. On the other, her relationship with William was becoming more dangerous. He still controlled every aspect of her life, started fights over nothing, and continued to display aggressive behavior. Her loved ones hoped that the baby would change things. Her mother and friends told her that once the child was born, William might calm down and take on the role of a responsible father. Zazell wanted to believe that, but deep down, her instincts told her otherwise. Despite everyone's expectations, the aggression didn't stop. During her pregnancy, the attacks not only continued, but became even more severe. The smallest thing could set him off. Sometimes it was jealousy without reason, other times it was just a bad mood. He lashed out at her even when she begged him to stop, reminding him of her condition. In August 2011, one of the worst incidents occurred. William lost control once again, and Zazell was left bruised and battered. When it was over, she could barely lift herself off the floor. Unable to stay near him any longer, she stumbled out of the house, weak from the pain. She had no destination. She just needed to get as far away as possible. Sometime later, her mother arrived to check on her and found her lying on the sidewalk. Her face was covered in dried blood, her body bruised, her strength completely drained. She looked lifeless, as if she had nothing left to fight with. In that moment, her mother knew that her daughter's life was hanging by a thread. That night changed everything for Zazell. In the past, she had tried to find excuses for William, but now she saw the truth. Things had gone too far. She finally realized that love and hope meant nothing if the other person didn't want to change. In September 2011, Zazell enrolled in college. She decided to get an education and become a counselor specializing in domestic abuse cases. She made this choice despite her circumstances because she wanted to turn her life around and help other women in similar situations. At that time, she was about 6 months pregnant. Despite the challenges, she continued attending classes. William was furious about her decision. It frustrated him because he saw her education as an attempt to break free from his control. On November 7th, 2011, Zazell Preston married William Wallace. She made this decision despite all the warning signs, despite the past abuse, despite the endless promises he had never kept. She believed that this step would change things, that an official marriage would bring stability and force him to act differently. Friends and family tried to stop her. They told her it was a mistake, that she was putting herself in even greater danger. Her mother, who had seen her suffer in this relationship, begged her not to go through with it. But Zazell was convinced that marriage required effort, and she had to try. To those around her, it made no sense. But to Zazell, this was her last chance. She believed that if they got married, William would finally take responsibility. That marriage would strengthen their bond and push him to be a better man for their future together. There was no grand wedding celebration. It felt more like a formality than a joyful occasion. That day, Zazell officially tied her life to the man she feared. The peace she had hoped for never came. 2 weeks after the birth of their son, it was clear that nothing had changed. On November 24th, 2011, Thanksgiving Day, William started another fight. He was irritable, on edge, and not even the holiday atmosphere could calm him down. Zazell was still recovering from childbirth, but that didn't stop William from having new outbursts of aggression. The argument that night started over something trivial. She had asked her younger brother-in-law to help her with a phone setting. William immediately accused her of disrespecting him, of not valuing him, and in front of their guests, he completely lost his temper. He was furious. He didn't care that family members were around, that it was a holiday gathering. He raised his voice, hurled accusations, and tried to make her feel like she had wronged him. This incident showed everyone exactly who he really was. But Zazell still held on to hope. She tried not to dwell on it, convincing herself that it was just nerves, just stress, that it would pass. But deep down, she already knew the truth. Things were only getting worse. On December 24th, 2011, their neighbors hosted a small Christmas Eve gathering. It was a night of celebration filled with laughter and joy. Zazell and William were there too. At first, everything seemed normal. Just another holiday party where no one could have guessed that tragedy was about to unfold. As the night went on, the tension between them became more and more noticeable. William's eyes followed her every move. He watched who she talked to, how she smiled. Every little thing she did fueled his suspicions. He convinced himself that she was trying to get attention from other men. The argument started on the way home. The moment their apartment door shut behind them, his jealousy exploded. He accused her of being disrespectful, of behaving inappropriately. Words quickly turned into shouting and then into physical aggression. Zazell knew that if she didn't leave the apartment right then, things would end badly. She tried to run out the door, but he caught her before she could escape. One of their neighbors, who happened to be nearby, saw her struggling to get away, but William grabbed her by the arm and dragged her back inside. The neighbor didn't step in. No one wanted to get involved in what seemed like a private dispute. Behind closed doors, the situation escalated beyond control. William no longer held back. He grabbed his wife and threw her onto a glass table. The surface shattered beneath her, sending sharp shards cutting into her skin. He then dragged her into the bathroom, turned on the hot water, and began pouring it over her wounds. The scalding temperature made the pain unbearable. Her body burned from both the deep cuts and the boiling water. She screamed, begged him to stop, but he ignored her, continuing his torment. In the other room, their newborn son's cries echoed through the apartment. At one point, William picked up the baby, walked over to his injured wife, and placed him in her lap. But she couldn't even hold him. Her body was completely unresponsive. By 2 a.m., he had lost interest. He tossed Zazell onto the bed and went to sleep. The apartment fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the infant's cries. But his mother could no longer comfort him. She was already gone. On the morning of December 25th, 2011, the Wallace home was eerily quiet. The children began to wake up, excited for Christmas morning, expecting to see their mother as always, making the day special for them. But this year, everything was different. In the living room, only William was there to greet them. He had already moved Zazell's body from the bed to the couch, positioning her as if she were simply resting. To hide the visible signs of the attack, he placed sunglasses over her eyes. The atmosphere in the house felt unnatural. As soon as Zazell's daughters walked in, he told them it was time to open presents. His tone didn't betray anything unusual. He acted as if it were just a regular Christmas morning. He urged them to start unwrapping gifts. The oldest daughter noticed something was off. Her mother usually took an active role in their holiday traditions, helping them figure out which gifts belonged to whom. But this time, she just sat there, motionless, which felt strange. The girl moved closer. She called out to her mother a few times, but got no response. She reached out and touched her hand. The skin was cold. Her body didn't move, didn't react. It didn't feel like she was asleep. She kept calling for her, hoping she would wake up, but nothing happened. At that moment, William stepped in. He told the girls that their mother was just exhausted, that she had too much to drink the night before, and that she needed time to recover. He ordered them to keep opening presents and to let her rest. Sometime later, William started making phone calls to Zazell's relatives. He told them that they had an argument the night before, and she had supposedly fallen and hit her head. However, despite the clear signs that something was wrong, he didn't call for medical help right away. At least 30 minutes passed before he finally dialed emergency services. By then, it was obvious that Zazell was unresponsive. When paramedics and law enforcement arrived at the scene, they immediately found the situation suspicious. William met them at the door, trying to explain what had happened. He claimed that Zazell had too much to drink the night before. They had a minor argument, and she had lost her balance, hit her head, and gone to sleep. According to him, he only realized something was wrong when she didn't wake up in the morning. But the scene inside the apartment didn't match his story. There was blood throughout the room, on the floor, walls, and furniture. The amount of it was far too much for a simple fall. Investigators immediately had doubts. When they approached the couch where Zazell was seated, it became clear that someone had deliberately altered the scene after her passing. She had been carefully positioned, sunglasses placed over her eyes. Her clothes were clean, despite the visible traces of blood around the apartment. It was evident that she had been changed after the fact, something that didn't align with the accidental fall William described. Paramedics examined her and confirmed that she was no longer alive. Officers began questioning witnesses and analyzing the apartment. Broken glass was scattered on the floor, and there were signs of a struggle. Everything pointed to a violent encounter. Zazell's body was sent for forensic examination. Medical experts determined that she had died from a traumatic brain injury. The force of the impact had caused internal bleeding. Multiple bruises and deep cuts were also documented. These injuries weren't consistent with a simple fall. They clearly indicated a prolonged and brutal attack. Based on these findings, law enforcement made the decision to arrest William Wallace. When he was informed of the charges, he immediately denied any wrongdoing. He insisted that Zazell was responsible for what happened, that she had fallen and suffered fatal injuries on her own. Despite his claims, the evidence told a different story. The investigation had only just begun, but law enforcement already understood that this was not an accident. It was a crime, and William would have to answer for it. After William Wallace's arrest, the case remained under investigation, but the legal proceedings dragged on for years. Despite the strong evidence, the case did not move as quickly as Zazell's loved ones had hoped. The trial was delayed for nearly 9 years, and throughout this time, the accused remained in custody. The key witness in the case was Zazell's oldest daughter. She was only 8 years old at the time of the tragedy and was the only person who could provide details about what had happened that night. However, her testimony was inconsistent. Due to her young age and the trauma she had endured, her recollections changed over time. The first interviews were conducted shortly after the incident, but with each retelling, her words varied slightly. She was afraid to speak, felt immense emotional pressure, and struggled to accurately express what she had seen. This made the prosecution's work more difficult. Investigators knew she had suffered a significant emotional wound. They did not rush her to testify, but as time passed, the trial remained at a standstill. Years went by, and the girl grew up, realizing that her words could be crucial to the case. She was still afraid to relive that night, but at some point, she understood that she needed to speak, for her mother's sake. In 2021, at 17 years old, she made the decision to testify in court. Her account became one of the most critical pieces of evidence against William. She described in detail what had happened that night, how her mother had suffered, how she had personally witnessed the violence, and how her stepfather had tried to cover up the truth. She recalled hearing her mother scream in pain as boiling water burned her wounds, and how later that night she no longer moved. Her words became a turning point in the trial. Her bravery finally helped push the case forward. The legal battle over Zazell Preston's death had lasted nearly a decade, but it wasn't until 2021 that it reached its final stage. Defense attorneys attempted to convince the jury that it had been an accident, but the forensic evidence proved otherwise. Medical examiners confirmed that Zazell had died from a severe traumatic brain injury and that the nature of her wounds indicated repeated blows. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found William Wallace guilty of second-degree murder and domestic abuse. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. During the trial, Zazell's family and friends spoke about how the pressure from those around her, including members of her religious community, had influenced her decision to stay in the marriage. They recalled how church leaders had advised her to be patient, to submit to her husband, and to keep the family together for the sake of her children. Later, among Zazell's personal belongings, her diary was found. In it, she had written about the abuse she had endured for years. She described her fear, her hope that things would get better, and how she had convinced herself that, with time, William would change. These entries provided a heartbreaking confirmation of just how deeply she had been trapped in the cycle of control. When religious leaders were asked about the advice they had given Zazell, one of them stated that he had always followed the principles of family unity, teaching her about patience and harmony. He expressed sorrow over what had happened, but did not acknowledge that his words might have influenced her decision to stay. The trial came to an end, but those who knew Zazell understood that no verdict could ever bring her back. Her story became a tragic reminder of how dangerous it can be to believe that an abuser will change if only they are loved and forgiven enough. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.